Asura from Asura's Wrath and Kratos from God of War. These characters have an uncanny amount of similarities beyond divine strength, angry father bent on vengeance, causing the absolute annihilation of my circle button. You get the idea. These two individuals stand among the upper echelon as gaming's strongest. I'll be taking Asura from the end of Asura's Wrath and Kratos from the end of God of War 3 and matching them up to see who would come on top. Starting off, I want to establish a bit of a ballpark for these characters and their stats and abilities before getting into the matchup itself. Asura is one of the 8 Guardian Generals, techno-divine beings who fight an eternal war with the Goma and the creator Vlitra. The Vlitra is basically a hostile spirit that inhabits their planet Gaia, or what we call Earth. The demigods using a form of energy called mantra to power their attacks and power themselves. Asura in this case using the mantra form of wrath, fueled by his never-yielding rage. Asura's strength has always been impressive, whether it's one-shotting Gongan Wysen's planet-sized form with a single punch, or slapping a moon-sized cannon in the face. The most impressive of these showings being against Chakravartin the Creator. Chakravartin the Creator is at the bare minimum universal in strength. Chakravartin remarks as how he's going to remake the world as he sees the world as a failure. In Japanese culture or kanji, world and universe are extremely interchangeable as both are derived off the kanji Sakai. Asura's Wrath being a primarily Japanese-based game that was, ported over, with Japanese game designer Hiroshi Matsuyama even taking inspiration from things like Dragon Ball and Naruto. So you kind of have two interpretations from Chakravartin. You either think, oh, he's going to remake the planet itself or remake the universe. The arguments just don't hold up for just planetary Asura, considering the sheer scale of Chakravartin's avatar, which is quite literally shown absorbing the observable universe into it while dwarfing galaxies in sheer size. If he was really going to recreate a single planet, why would he be absorbing the universe into his statue? Let's really think about that. More people having contention with the fact that it's stated Chakravartin is standing on the Milky Way galaxy and that the other galaxies around him are just smaller versions. But A, the art book was released years after the game's initial release, so it's not even as if it takes this like objective place beyond what the game shows. It more so supplements it. If you want to think like, why are these galaxies so small then, and maybe there's like a size inconsistency, this would be more so due to graphical limitations, as Asura's Wrath is a 6 GB game and it's very hard to portray things at a massive size consistently without creating unnecessary space/data. Even the art book storyboards who talk about Chakravartin keeping the wheels of the planet in motion just don't inherently debunk anything, since the whole purpose in the story of the game was to choose somebody to kind of take his place and rule Gaia. So him mentioning that he's the one who spins the planet just makes sense in that specific context and isn't necessarily a debunk or anything. Beyond this, there's also calcs done on Chakravartin's avatar, the giant statue that Asura is flying towards, and when it blows up, the amount of energy it releases. The energy from the statue exploding being comparable to even greater, depending on the baseline you use, to the estimated total mass energy of the observable universe. And the bottom line is, this is the same individual who's just casually throwing planets and stars. So it's like, okay, if he's throwing literal planets and suns at Asura, what's the most likely interpretation? This done in Chakravartin's suppressed state, as this is in his true form and full power, which is exponentially greater than this current form, not really quantifiable. It's just a large power level above what he is now. Just kind of, it makes it so this isn't really too questionable in my opinion. So Universal Asura is very consistent, not even discussing Chakravartin's other feats like creating Naraka, the literal cycle of life and death, or any of the possibilities with the Naraka realm and some of the arguments there. I'm not going to get too much into that, but it should be pretty clear Universal Asura is just, there isn't too much to say, and if you really just said planetary, I don't know what to tell you. The only questionable aspect of the scaling we have is that we have no idea how long it would have taken to destroy and remake the universe. However, Yasha does note time is short when he fights Asura, implying it would not have taken him more than a few days or a prolonged period of time to actually destroy and recreate the universe, as he notes he's done many times before. Another side note is that when the credits start to roll, we see Mithra fly past several galaxies when returning to Gaia, showing that A, Asura traveled a multi-galactic distance, and B, we never saw those galaxies when flying with Asura, so we can conclude that Chakravartin did indeed destroy the galaxies, or was intending to. For Asura's speed, his best showings are towards the end of the game, again, when he dodges Chakravartin's beams that are shot directly at Asura from across the universe, reaching him almost instantly. These beams have been commonly calced to absurd speed ranges, ranging from billions to even trillion times faster than light. Every calculation done will be in the description, but a common theme with them is that it takes the time that the beam or Asura travel to the Milky Way galaxy from Earth. Asura consistently dodging and reacting to these beams at close and long range. The fastest speed for Asura actually being calced at 437.82 trillion times the speed of light. Regardless of what interpretation you have have of the feat is just massively faster than light. There's no question about that. So for Asura speed-wise, billions, even trillions times faster than light. Now for Kratos' strength, Kratos is also pretty simple to tackle when discussing his strength. Kratos, by the time of God of War 3, directly scales to or above that of the primordials, specifically Uranus, the father of Kronos, who is touted as being the creator of the universe. A relatively simple feat, in all honesty, as Kronos himself is the progenitor of time itself as a concept. The primordials would also scale to these beings who existed before any of the world, underworld, or any concept of death existed, creating the universe itself as a result of their combat alone. This being derived specifically off Uranus, cited repeatedly again as the father of the universe. Uranus was overthrown by Kronos and Kronos Zeus, while Kratos obviously being able to combat Zeus in God of War 3, even defeating him with the aid of the Blade of Olympus, only really falling to fear Zeus, who scales above regular Zeus and was not present during the Great War. So that's not too relevant in this case. Another reference point for Kratos' scaling can be the Titan Atlas, the embodiment of strength and endurance, who survived the living world / sky, literally falling on his face after Persephone vaporized the pillar of the world. The universe above fell into the underworld with enough force to destroy all of creation. The Olympians able to compete with the likes of Kronos and Atlas in terms of strength, who would go on to get stronger. At least Hades confirmed to get stronger with soul consumption after he absorbed the soul of the strongest of the Titans, Atlas, and thousands if not millions of normal souls after that. This would also extend to somebody who's nowhere near Kratos' level in the form of Hercules. Mentioned his labor of going out and finding the Hera apples in his fight with Kratos, which according to the labor's lore would suggest he temporarily replaced Atlas and held up the cosmos for him, at least for an unspecified amount of time, which definitely fits with Hercules' theme and also means Kratos can brawl with and overpower somebody who scales to Atlas in raw strength. The World Pillar's universal scale is also reinforced when discussing how the underworld itself is more than likely infinite. First by the concept artist who drew it, and the director of God of War 3 stated that the concept artist's words about the levels that they drew hold a lot of weight, both verbally and through text. Then it's stated in the God of War 1 lore to be a chasm of immeasurable magnitude. Cory Barlog, the director of the Norse games, writer of Ghost of Sparta, and senior creative artist in 1 and 2, also reinforced Cecil Kim's words that Underworld was infinite, giving his own reason as well. And if you want to kind of like add to how vast the underworld really is, it's literally shown to contain stars and constellations inside of it during the events of God of War 1, the same game that first called it immeasurable. And if you're going to be extra and not call them stars, the game literally uses the exact same graphical skybox to illustrate the night sky in the background of the Ares versus Kratos fight. Kratos would scale pretty objectively above all these characters, and when you look at the fact that the God of War cosmology is made up of entire realms or dimensions that are just universal in size, it puts Kratos into that low multiversal range. And even if you disagree with that assessment of Kratos, which I think, you know, is fine if you do, obviously there's a lot to the God of War scaling and whatnot, that's not what's relevant. What's relevant is that he's doing what Asura is doing, which is defeating universal opponents on a much more consistent basis. So it wouldn't necessarily be a matter of, oh, Asura is objectively stronger. No, it's how much stronger is Kratos is more so dependent on you just due to how you scale God of War. But Kratos does consistently have more arguments to say he would just be stronger than Asura. Kratos' finite speed is also just as impressive as Asura's. Probably one of Kratos' better showings in terms of like discussing his finite speed is off the Sisters of Fate. Sisters of Fate have the absolute insane multitasking feat where they monitor and manage the threads of fate at once in real time. For those who are not aware, Sisters of Fate are the 3 deities who determine the fates of everyone in the verse, and they do so through the threads that are spread out throughout their temple. They have so many threads that they connect to every single point in the world. They are stated to control the fates of all life on Earth, be it the animals in the wild, fish in the river, anything that's alive is controlled by them. But it just doesn't stop there. They don't just control living things. They also have specific threads for volcanoes and the fate of rivers such as the Nile, the landscape in general. Everything that lies on the world's surface is controlled by them, and they do so meticulously and carefully, requiring precise measurements, making the feat even more insane. This has actually been calced using very conservative measurements, not accounting for the threads extending to life like forests, volcanoes, rivers, and continents, at 166 billion times the speed of light, which, again, considering what's being controlled all at real time, is not that crazy. And this feat existing for all of time, so it makes it harder to get an exact calc for it, but the number should just be a very conservative estimate. And this isn't even the only finite thing Kratos has. If you want to look at the primordials creating the universe via their fight alone, this has actually been calced from 730 quadrillion times the speed of light on a lower end interpretation to 1.466 quintillion times the speed of light. So Listen, we kind of knew this, but like these speed ranges are just that crazy for God of War. So duel actually should be somewhat comparable in terms of speed. Now, there might be a discrepancy depending on where you lie, but I'll discuss later in the vid why that necessarily doesn't matter for Asura and his path to victory in this fight. Now, I could talk about these characters and their arsenals. However, I'm more so going to be talking about that as it becomes relevant in the discussion itself. Now, starting off with the fight, Asura, when talking about his approach to battle, is very straightforward with his approach, favoring a brawler-like style of combat. Now, this doesn't mean, though, that he isn't an animal in terms of hand-to-hand combat by any means, especially when you consider who he's combating. Asura is shown on par or even superior to the 7 deities, who each embody a specific emotion of human nature, who are active combatants against the Goma and Vlitra, each with over 12,000 years of combat experience, which Asura was able to overcome. Arguably more impressive, though, is when Asura is shown taking on the likes of Ryu from Street Fighter, described as a master of fighting karate. Ryu is a practitioner of the Shotokan style karate, along with elements taken from other forms of martial arts, being mainly based on a style called Ansatsuken, a Japanese neologism used frequently in fictional works to describe any martial art style or fighting technique that has been developed with the purpose of killing an opponent. This is used mainly by someone else Asura fights, that being Akuma and even Oni, the form Akuma takes when he's become one with the Satsui no Hado entirely, losing any traces of humanity that he had in the first place. Being stated to be literally fighting essence, Asura again going blow for blow with said Oni, this being consistent with the statements made about Oni during Asura's wrath, titling him the Master of Fist, or his fist having no equal. Asura is able to combat the likes of Oni for 500 years, to the point both combatants are still facing each other in a standstill and have turned to stone with developing moss. What does this mean? Well, in terms of hand-to-hand, it would mean Asura would just absolutely dominate or stomp Kratos, as he would directly scale off Oni, noted to be at the top of his own verse in terms of power and scale, scaling above the likes of Gen, who's learned countless martial arts and made 2 martial arts that are distinct and implied to be better than the last. Oni would also scale to people like Seth, who are able to copy the fighting styles and has a composite fighting style they can constantly add to, making one martial art taking all the best aspects of other martial arts. Compared to Kratos, who's much more lacking in terms of hand-to-hand, having basic Spartan training along with 10 years of service to the gods of Olympus, taking on beasts of all shapes and sizes. Now, while Kratos isn't a slouch in any capacity in terms of hand-to-hand, which can even be said with an older version of the character, varying his strike speeds to gauge Heimdall's threat perception capabilities, he still has nowhere near the feats of skill Asura does, which, ignoring the Street Fighter stuff, is more consistent with the games, as Asura is fighting actual generals who train and fight on the front lines, ironically very close to what Kratos is, whereas Kratos is shown fighting the gods of Olympus along with countless titans, along with many beasts throughout his career, neither really being known or shown for skill in hand-to-hand. You would potentially say him taking out other demigods is more indicative of this. However, Kratos would have far more experience than contemporaries such as Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, and more. Kratos does have a more tactically sound mind, however, when compared to Asura, solving difficult puzzles or traversing areas filled with puzzles within his own universe on a consistent basis. Examples being Hera's Garden, the Labyrinth, etc. So Kratos can make a case for having an overall higher IQ while having fundamentally weaker hand-to-hand capabilities than Asura. This being displayed again with the puzzles and structures in the game, such as when he unravels the pattern and structure of the Labyrinth, which Daedalus actually claims was making the gods insecure because of its genius level construct and mechanisms used to power it. What Kratos lacks in hand-to-hand, he makes up for in his arsenal and abilities, that being the assortment of weapons he borrows off the Olympians and beasts he encounters throughout his journey. Now, one of the biggest issues for Asura is the Blades of Chaos themselves, as these would more than likely make it so Asura can't create additional arms to aid him in battle. For those who don't know, Asura has some pretty impressive regeneration. He's able to grow back limbs and shake off massive amounts of damage to his body. In the video game version of Asura's Wrath, his limbs do take time to regrow, either via him resting or powering up into a higher stage of power. However, in the manga version of the game, Asura's Wrath Kai, we see he can regrow his limbs instantly. This also plays into Asura's immortality, as each time he's killed in the game, he resurrects, each time the resurrection taking less and less time. By the time of his third resurrection, he came back from Naraka in just a few hours. The manga takes this further, with his resurrection being instant after being killed by Deus in the Karma Fortress. His regen also improving after each resurrection, eventually being able to regenerate the loss of his core, or being reduced to a metal skeleton by Yasha. This is done on panel instantly in the manga, taking the loss of mantra as a concept to finally kill Asura when his wrath was finally appeased by killing Chakravartin. Kratos' Blades of Chaos have the innate ability of just negating regeneration. We see this with various Olympians, Titans, and even Furies that Kratos fights throughout the series. One of the better examples examples to outline it, however, is off of Zeus, who Kratos injures with the Blades of Chaos to the point that he actually has a blood trail he can follow from Zeus. This same Zeus was capable of regenerating from the Blade of Olympus, so the blades would be more than likely effective on Asura, which is huge as that's Asura's main way of fighting. The blades themselves also have the added effect of siphoning the life force of Asura while making Kratos all the stronger in the encounter. It's a bit questionable if this could work on Asura due to the fundamental differences from where his strength comes from and how well, you know, he's like a human demigod cyborg. But the idea that this is possible and more of a passive effect from the blades and Kratos themselves only serves to help Kratos and hinder Asura when pertaining to the blades. It's also not that inconsistent for characters in Asura's own verse to just like hit him so hard the arms just break, and it takes him a while to regrow them anyway. So when you have someone of comparable strength also breaking them off with all these added passive bonuses, it just makes it very difficult for Asura. The good thing for Asura is the arms themselves aren't actually that crucial for Asura's development and acceleration, which is honestly his biggest attribute as a combatant. Asura's accelerated development is just so insane, and I want to put it into perspective. The gaps he closed are far beyond the gaps that Kratos has closed in terms of like being inferior to somebody. We see this many times in Asura's own game, but the most primary example and the one that displays it most clearly is when he's in his fight with Chakravartin. He goes from, in the duration of one fight, from getting his strongest form one shot by one finger from Chakravartin to Chakravartin almost one-shotting himself when trying to attack Asura. This is consistent with pretty much every fight that Asura has. He starts off losing and just develops more and more. And it seems that the stronger he gets, the more accelerated his development is, with it just being unparalleled by the time he fights Chakravartin. Kratos has shown no indication of something akin to this, aside from the power of hope, closing that much of a gap in terms of strength via just fighting somebody for a prolonged period of time. Now, I'm not saying Kratos himself also doesn't have accelerated development, because he also does display some, inheriting the god's abilities of power growth over time without inherently training or fighting necessarily. This is an apparent ability of gods displayed when Zeus frees the other Olympians from the stomach of their father. They are all battle ready to fight long drawn out war with the Titans despite having been trapped in their father since infancy. A direct comparison we have for Kratos comes from his kid brother Deimos, who we know from Ghost of Sparta was imprisoned from a young age and was tormented by Thanatos, and yet when freed by Kratos, and his crazed brother is capable of great feats of strength and even able to damage Kratos, who has extensive training and power-ups from the gods themselves and actually being a god of war. So while Kratos would be developing through this encounter, that much is clear, it just wouldn't be to the magnitude of Asura. For God of War fans, imagine if Kratos was gonna fight Ares, right, without the power of hope, and he went from like that base, you know, demigod level to actually just defeating Ares without the power of hope. That's basically what Asura did. That's kind of the mountain of strength he basically climbed in one fight, and it's definitely going to be his winning attribute. Another comparison I could possibly make is how Garou and Saitama from One Punch Man are both accelerating and improving. Yes, Saitama is improving at a faster and higher rate. What does this mean? Well, it essentially opens up the idea that if the stat difference between Kratos and Asura is not that big, it opens up the idea that Asura could potentially make a comeback and adapt to Kratos if Kratos does not finish him off as quickly. So does Kratos' hacks and abilities to mitigate potential strength increases, regeneration, along with the potential stat difference outweigh Asura's ability to adapt to him? Which also isn't anything Kratos hasn't experienced. Like, hitting Kratos hard is not outside Kratos' realm at all, as he's dealt with being stronger and bigger than him. This, coupled with the fact that Kratos does have a rather nuanced arsenal with a bench of abilities that Asura has no experience combating, with Kratos being a very different fighter than Asura is used to, makes it a bit tougher for Asura. Now, I don't even doubt that Asura could potentially adapt to these abilities individually, especially since we see in his own game, he's able to adapt to Chakravartin stopping time mid-fight. So it's more likely that a lot of Kratos' arsenal would be effective for kind of a one move only or a very short time until Asura just simply adapts over it. An example of this being a possible soul snatch via the claws of Hades. This really wouldn't work, as Asura, despite having died twice, has never had his soul absorbed by Naraka, the place where all deceased beings go to reunite with the wheel of life and death, and having become one with the flow of mantra. Since the beginning of time, Asura is the only known being to have resisted such a process and even escaped Naraka. However, falling into the depths of Naraka would have still represented doom for Asura's soul. Chakravartin states that his willingness to move forward even after death is the reason why neither the Goma nor seven deities will ever be able to have his soul, despite both having the power to obtain the souls of the fallen. So Asura's soul is being able to resist actually being extracted and just blatantly absorbed by the realm of Naraka. So being comparable in strength to Kratos, at least by some minor degree, would just make it that it's extremely unlikely to impossible for Kratos to kind of win via this win condition. So is that all there is? Asura potentially adapting beyond Kratos? Well, when looking at Asura's arsenal, he does have things to match Kratos and Kratos' vast arsenal, such as flight, which obviously can match Kratos' Icarus wings, meaning that there's no real advantage there. Potential energy blast that, while weaker than his fists, aren't weak by any means, which may be useful in possibly dealing with some of Kratos' long-range attacks or weaker weapons in his arsenal, like the Bow of Apollo. Asura does also have another potential win con in this situation. Asura has actually shown the ability to use the Shon Goku Satsu, translated to the Raging Demon, a super combo and one of the most powerful techniques in the Street Fighter franchise. He does this against Ryu, who's under the influence of the Satsui no Hado, as displayed with him using the exact same on-screen input for the Raging Demon as Ryu in order to use the technique, along with the same pose technique after the exchange. Asura would also perform this feat with Akuma, who's more advanced than Ryu, and actually replicate the Raging Demon again against Oni, who's got an evolved variation of the Raging Demon. Why does this matter? Well, the reason this is extremely useful against Kratos is due to how the technique fundamentally operates. The Raging Demon attacks the enemy via the weight of their own sins, rather than by Akuma's fist. This is made pretty explicit with the Japanese and English version of the technique. This technique would make use of Kratos' own guilt over killing his wife and child against him, which would be extremely effective, as this is something Kratos has struggled with for years on end, being plagued with nightmares from that night, and remaining in service to the gods for over a decade in order to rid himself of them. The effect of the technique showing Bison getting disintegrated due to their effects. There's also a chance that in a similar capacity to when Fear Zeus was getting ready to destroy Kratos, the power of hope may emerge in a similar capacity, albeit Pandora did influence Kratos in that regard, but assuming he'd better in this situation with the same, it can hypothetically still apply. This would be supported due to how the power of hope is buried under Kratos' guild, so being put in a similar position, like when he was met with overwhelming fear, may trigger it. But again, this is somewhat debatable, as we just don't know how this attack would really affect Kratos. There just is the possibility. And aside from this, Asura's main way of defeating Kratos is essentially to just adapt beyond him if the fight lasts too long with his superior adaptation capabilities. Unless you believe Kratos is so much stronger via other ways of scaling the character, then the gap may just be too big for Asura to overcome. However big the gap is entirely variable depending on how you view Kratos strength-wise. His strength and speed, at least from a finite perspective, aren't that far off from what Asura has himself, so it may entirely be doable. So the Blades of Chaos are definitely Kratos' biggest attribute and biggest issue for Asura, but this also isn't discussing the Blade of Olympus, the weapon forged by Zeus that ended the Great War, defeating the Titans. This is arguably Kratos' most powerful weapon at the time. It contains the power Kratos once held as the God of War. The weapon can create energy blasts, force fields, along with lightning's power up its attacks. The same blade banished all the Titans to Tartarus, displaying a large area of effect BFR type of attack. The blade's most potent attribute, however, is its ability to absorb and nullify power, along with the ability to negate traditional regeneration and immortality. This is displayed as Kratos had his powers absorbed and drained into the blade to the point it rendered him mortal again, and when Athena had her godly powers absorbed into the blade, rendering her mortal. This is very similar to what I was talking about with the Blades of Chaos, where there's the potential win con for Kratos to actually absorb Asura's powers via the Blade of Olympus, which again, I won't say is absolute because it kind of gets into some semantics, like how does mantra necessarily compare to Greek magic. We also see this as Kratos pours his godly powers into the blade, to the point that it just made him completely mortal and he couldn't really do anything, even being fatally wounded by the Colossus of Rhodes, just slamming a hand on him. So there is a lot of power nullification, regeneration negating, even immortality negation potential with the Blade of Olympus, just due to the fact that all of the gods pretty much fear it, they're unable to regen past it, which adds to the potential win cons in Kratos' arsenal. And I will say, to be kind of fair to Asura, I do think like these two weapons are more so where Kratos' path to victory lies. Like for example, you know, Apollo's bow isn't going to be that crazy, and you kind of want a little perspective on this. Apollo's bow, it really isn't that crazy against normal enemies or even the gods that Kratos fights themselves. I touched on the Claws of Hades. The Head of Helios would be kind of good for a distraction type purpose. Boots of Hermes, maybe giving Kratos a short-term speed boost. All of this just open up options for Kratos. There's even the Golden Fleece, which may be useful in parrying some of Asura's like physical blows or any of his harder hitting moves, as it was even capable of parrying back the Blade of Olympus. And it also really doesn't help that Asura's arsenal is a lot more limited. Like he can make mantra arms, he has energy blasts, his secondary method of attacking besides punching are pretty much energy based attacks that he launches by punching them out of his hand. But again, even in the game, it's kind of similar to Apollo's bow, where they're pretty consistently weaker than Asura's own punches via how they do far less damage than his punches in the game. Yet, you know, they're by no means weak. The stronger of Asura's techniques really being the Wrath Cannon, a technique that allows Asura to pour his mantra into a target and detonate it outwards. This would be far more powerful than any of his other attacks, as it's a technique that fatally wounded Deus and cracked Chakravartin apart. But even then, right, it's not even as if it one-shotted either of these opponents. It was more so like the last hit after just beating them up continuously. And then that would also get into Kratos' regen and how Asura would overcome that, which unless you're that much stronger than Kratos in terms of physical force, which Asura isn't, you're not going to be able to take him down that way. Like, the only example where we have any remote measurement of what this could be is Thor in the newer God of War. And that's kind of predicated on your opinion on God of War 3 Kratos versus the newer game Kratos. Not going to just voice it here, but for the sake of discussion, just saying they're comparable, and how Thor was hitting harder than anybody else from the Greek era. So it's just, there's a lot to it, and Asura just really doesn't have the strength to just permanently put down Kratos either. Even Asura's unlimited mode, which is essentially a mode he goes into by making mantra flow throughout his entire body, Asura can enter unlimited mode when he becomes far more powerful and extremely durable, to the point where most attacks aren't able to even damage him. This is only usable for short bursts. It must be charged up again. And inflicting and receiving damage allows him to accumulate tension and then release it to enter unlimited modes. But even then, the buff this gives, you know, while substantial, A, isn't that quantifiable, and B, Kratos can match it with the Spartan Rage if he does feel the need to. And the Spartan Rage is also pretty substantial. It's very similar to Asura's unlimited mode. If anything, it might even be greater, as in the Fallen God comic, it allows Kratos to go from being one-shot to actually overpowering the Chaos Beast, also giving Kratos a pretty substantial speed and strength boost. So even Asura's respective like strength increase, Kaioken times mode, isn't inherently putting him above Kratos. This, coupled with the fact that Kratos even has reactive evolution of his own. An example of this can be seen with him passively defying the Sisters of Fate, with him becoming immune to their attempts to pretty much snip his thread and alter his destiny. Something they can actually do towards the gods, but not Kratos himself. They try multiple times throughout his journey in God of War 2, and they're just not able to. This is pretty substantial, and it does paint the picture that you could even have a bit of an adaptation, reactive evolution war between Kratos and Asura. But at the end of the day, you know, Asura's real win con is maybe like Art of the Raging Demon, or it's just adapt beyond Kratos, like I said previously. Whereas Kratos does have that slight stat advantage to all these ways to potentially mitigate Asura's arsenal, being a very different type of fighter, very tactical, very nuanced. And I know I didn't go into everything for Kratos' character because there is a lot. I just kind of wanted to focal point it down to what was really relevant into this discussion. So win conditions for Asura would be adapting beyond Kratos if the fight lasts too long. Asura is closing some of the most astronomical gaps that I've seen in just fiction in general. There's going to be a winning attribute in this case. He'll have to play around Kratos' weapons, either adapting to Kratos himself or the abilities his weapons present, if possible. While Kratos does have accelerated development, it's just never been on the level of Asura. That and Art of the Raging Demon, which we've already discussed in somewhat length, compares to Kratos, who should have better stats, has hacks that Asura really has no exposure to and would make difficult for Asura to adapt to. It's much more nuanced arsenal, which offers many more plays to be made. He has a large arsenal of attacks that Asura has no battle experience dealing with. Possible adaptation of his own to anything Asura throws at him. So at the end of the day, you have guy who hits hard and can adapt to really strong guys versus guy who can also hit hard, has all these extra added abilities, comparable regen, and ways to adapt and react and evolve of his own. So for these reasons, I do lean towards Kratos in this conversation. I do think Asura has a chance, especially depending on where you scale the characters. However large that distance is, pretty much determines how long this fight is going to be. So let me know if you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down below, who you think wins and why. Try to keep it civil. I know people get defensive when talking about these two characters. I also have to give a huge shout out to a couple individuals for helping me with research for this video and like getting everything together. For the God of War stuff, my boy Edgard, please check out his socials if you're interested. He helped me with the God of War research. Carnifex for the Asura's Wrath research and scaling. He was instrumental in helping me make sure the Asura stuff was more on point this time around. And my boy Nyotic for just helping me with the Street Fighter stuff. Just please check these guys out. Video couldn't have been good without them, and they helped with a lot of stuff. So cannot stress this enough. Big thank you to these guys.